On August 8, 2025, the U.S. Supreme Court issued an emergency stay, a move that sent shockwaves through Washington and across the nation. The decision came late in the evening, after days of mounting legal challenges and public outcry. The justices, in a rare and urgent session, responded to petitions from business groups, state governments, and international partners, all alarmed by the sweeping scope of President Trump's new tariff program. The court's order abruptly halted the implementation of tariffs that had been set to take effect within hours, freezing a key component of the administration's economic strategy. President Trump, who had championed the tariffs as a bold move to protect American industries and jobs, now faced a major setback. The executive orders, signed with great fanfare, were suddenly in limbo, their future uncertain. The court's rare intervention paused tariffs on goods from countries worldwide, including close allies, signaling deep judicial concern over the policy's legal foundation. Legal experts noted that such emergency action by the Supreme Court is highly unusual, reserved for cases where the stakes are national in scope and the consequences immediate. The justices' decision reflected not only doubts about the legality of the tariffs, but also worries about their potential to disrupt global trade and diplomatic relations. Businesses and consumers, reeling from rising costs and economic uncertainty, saw a sudden, if temporary, reprieve. For weeks, companies had scrambled to adjust supply chains, while families braced for higher prices on everyday goods. The court's stay offered a moment of relief, but also left many questions unanswered about what would come next. Small business owners in particular expressed both hope and anxiety as they awaited further developments. The White House condemned the ruling as a political intrusion, accusing the judiciary of undermining the president's authority to act in the nation's economic interest. Meanwhile, opponents of the tariffs hailed the decision as a vital check on executive overreach, with some celebrating outside the Supreme Court and others voicing support on social media and in the press. The debate quickly became a flashpoint in the ongoing struggle between the branches of government. More than a trade dispute, this was a battle over the separation of powers and the rules that define American democracy. The Supreme Court's intervention underscored the enduring tension between the executive and judicial branches and raised fundamental questions about the limits of presidential power in times of crisis. As the nation watched, the outcome of this legal showdown would shape not only the future of trade policy, but the very balance of power at the heart of the American system. At the heart of the conflict is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, a 1977 law granting the president broad authority to address foreign threats. Traditionally, the IEPA targeted hostile nations or terrorist groups, not trade deficits or immigration. The Trump administration's expansive interpretation allowed sweeping tariffs, bypassing Congress's constitutional role in regulating commerce. Critics argue this turns a targeted tool into a blunt instrument for protectionism, undermining the balance of powers. The administration insists the IEPA's broad language is necessary for modern economic threats. This fundamental disagreement propelled the case to the Supreme Court. The path to the Supreme Court was marked by rapid escalation. In March, Trump imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods, straining key alliances. April saw the broader Liberation Day tariffs, sparking legal challenges from affected businesses. After a brief court victory for plaintiffs, the tariffs stayed in effect pending appeal. By August, new threats against Canada and a 50% blanket tariff on India intensified the crisis. Just days after the India tariffs, the Supreme Court intervened. The relentless pressure and legal resistance forced the nation's highest court to act. The tariffs generated $150 billion for the government, but at a steep cost to Americans. Prices on everyday goods soared, squeezing families and fueling inflation. Small and mid-sized businesses faced skyrocketing costs, layoffs, and paralyzing uncertainty. Investment and hiring stalled as companies struggled to adapt to volatile supply chains. The policy, meant to protect U.S. industry, often hurt domestic firms reliant on global networks. Disrupted supply chains led to delays, higher costs, and lost opportunities nationwide. The tariffs exposed just how interconnected the U.S. economy is with the world. The legal fight was led by small and mid-sized businesses facing existential threats. VOS Selections, a New York wine importer, and Microkits, a Virginia electronics firm, saw costs soar and jobs lost. Their coalition, represented by prominent attorneys, challenged the tariffs as unconstitutional and devastating to American entrepreneurship. These stories put a human face on the legal battle, showing the real-world stakes. The case united free market advocates and constitutional scholars against executive overreach. Their testimony highlighted the profound impact of the trade war on ordinary business owners. At the heart of this legal battle lies a fundamental question: just how much power does the president have under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA? This case is not just about a single policy or administration, it's about the very structure of American government and the boundaries of executive authority. The Trump administration's position is clear. They argue that the IEPA grants the president sweeping authority to respond to economic threats that could jeopardize national security. In their view, the modern world moves too quickly for Congress to keep up, and the president must be able to act decisively, sometimes even unilaterally, when the nation's interests are at stake. This, they say, is not just a matter of convenience, but a necessity in an era of global markets and rapid change. Supporters of this view emphasize that economic threats can emerge overnight, and waiting for congressional approval could mean missing critical windows to protect American jobs, industries, or even national security itself. They believe the executive branch needs the flexibility to impose measures like tariffs or sanctions quickly, without being bogged down by lengthy legislative debates. On the other side, the plaintiffs argue that this interpretation goes too far. They point to the Constitution, which explicitly gives Congress, not the president, the power to regulate trade and impose taxes. They warn that allowing the president to bypass Congress undermines the careful system of checks and balances that has defined American democracy for centuries. According to the plaintiffs, the IEPA was never intended to be a blank check for sweeping economic action. Instead, it was designed for targeted, temporary measures in response to genuine emergencies, such as sanctions against hostile foreign actors or efforts to combat terrorism financing. Using it to impose broad tariffs, they argue, stretches the law far beyond its original purpose. They caution that if the president is allowed to wield such unchecked power, it could erode the foundations of democracy and upset the delicate balance between the branches of government. The separation of powers, they insist, is not just a technicality, it's a safeguard against tyranny and overreach. Ultimately, this case is about much more than tariffs or trade policy. It's about defending the constitutional limits on executive authority and ensuring that no single branch of government can act without meaningful oversight. Legal scholars and policymakers alike are watching closely, aware that the outcome could reshape the balance of power for years to come. The decision in this case will set a precedent, not just for future presidents, but for the entire American system of government, defining how power is shared, checked, and balanced in the face of new and evolving challenges. The Supreme Court's intervention triggered a looming logistical nightmare: the possible refund of $150 billion in tariffs. If the tariffs are ruled illegal, the government must repay importers, requiring a massive, complex reimbursement effort. Customs and Border Protection would need to review millions of transactions, straining federal resources. For businesses, refunds could offer relief, but delays and bureaucracy would prolong financial pain. The payout would hit the federal budget hard, sparking political battles over funding and accountability. The refund crisis adds fiscal urgency to the constitutional stakes. The question of repayment looms large as the case moves forward. The tariffs sparked diplomatic crises, especially with Canada, Mexico, and India. Allies saw the duties as betrayals, violating trade agreements and prompting retaliatory tariffs. Decades of trust and cooperation were undermined, making collaboration on broader issues harder. The 50% tariff on India shocked the global community, threatening a key strategic partnership. America's reputation as a reliable ally suffered, leaving the U.S. more isolated on the world stage. The Supreme Court's pause offers a chance to repair relationships, but the damage lingers. The episode stands as a warning about the high diplomatic cost of unilateral trade action. BOS Selections, Inc. v. Trump is more than just another case on the Supreme Court's docket. It stands as a defining test for the very core of American democracy. The outcome of this case will echo far beyond the courtroom, shaping the nation's future and the way its government functions for decades to come. The Supreme Court's ruling will determine how power is distributed between the president and Congress, setting a standard that could last for generations. At stake is the delicate balance that has defined the American system of government since its founding, a balance that ensures no single branch can dominate the others. If the administration prevails, it could open the door to a dramatic expansion of executive authority. The president could gain the ability to impose sweeping policies simply by declaring a national emergency, bypassing the traditional checks and balances that Congress provides. This would fundamentally alter the way major decisions are made, potentially allowing future presidents to act unilaterally in ways never before seen. On the other hand, a victory for the plaintiffs would reaffirm Congress's vital constitutional role. It would send a clear message that emergency powers are not a blank check for the executive branch, but are subject to meaningful oversight and limits. This outcome would strengthen the separation of powers and ensure that the voices of the people, through their elected representatives, remain central in moments of national crisis. The decision will set a powerful precedent for how America governs itself, especially in times of uncertainty and crisis. It will influence not only this administration, but all those that follow, shaping the boundaries of presidential power and congressional authority for years to come. The stakes in this case go far beyond tariffs or trade policy. They reach into the very heart of the nation's system of checks and balances. The outcome will help define what kind of government Americans live under, and how resilient the Constitution remains in the face of new challenges. As the country anxiously awaits the Supreme Court's decision, the future of American democracy truly hangs in the balance. The ruling will not only resolve a legal dispute, it will help determine the direction of the nation and the principles that guide it for generations to come.